Hi everyone, and welcome to the NACADA webinar, Helping Students Clarify Their Dreams, Advising the Foreclosed Student. My name is Kyle Ross, and I am an advisor for undergraduate nursing students at Washington State University. Joining me today are three of my colleagues who will introduce themselves. Jose?
Welcome everybody. My name is Jose Ramos, and I'm an academic advisor for exploratory students at Old Dominion University. Thank you for joining us.
Anna?
Thank you, Kyle. Hello, everybody. My name is Anna Brown, and I'm an academic coordinator for speech and hearing sciences at Washington State University. Thank you for joining us today.
And Olga?
Hi, everybody. My name is Olga Salinas. I'm an academic advisor for the College of Health Sciences at Boise State University. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, everyone. For today's discussion, I will start us off with an overview of Marcia's identity status theory, so we can understand what it means to say that a student is foreclosed on a major or career pathway. When we use the term advisor in this webinar, we are broadly referring to anyone who works with students in an advising capacity, whether or not it is your primary role. Jose will share with us a great resource from his institution to assess if a student is foreclosed. I will then discuss how advisors can recognize when a student is foreclosed through personality traits they exhibit, statements they say, and questions we can ask. At that point, we will then focus on conversations with foreclosed students early on in their undergraduate education. Anna will provide a brief overview of how advisors can incorporate motivational interviewing techniques into their practices when talking with first or second year students. Olga will then conclude the presentation portion of today's webinar by discussing a useful model for working with junior or senior students who face rejection from their intended major or career pathway. But first, Anna will share one of her experiences working with a foreclosed student.
Thank you, Kyle. So today I'd like to share with you a story that I have from when I was a brand new advisor and my belief that I had to support my students no matter what. I believed it was my job to support my students unconditionally and to help them through school to whatever end, even the bitter end at times. As you can imagine, I found out very early in my career that this advising model fails with foreclosed students, a term that I had no idea existed until much later in my career. So here's my story about Molly. Molly's not a story I'm necessarily proud of, but it is a story I feel is important to share with all of you today. Molly grew up knowing she was going to be a nurse. She came from a long line of nurses. Her grandmother had been a nurse. Her mother was a nurse. Two of her aunts were nurses, and many of her friends were going to school to be a nurse. So naturally, why wouldn't Molly go to school to be a nurse? Well, Molly entered the university deficient in both English and math, and as advisors, we know what that means for our students, right? Molly was already behind many of her pre-nursing students, or her fellow pre-nursing students. As her advisor, I was supportive, I was encouraging, I got Molly connected to all the right resources she needed to get caught up to her peers, which took almost a full academic year to do so. Molly was caught up, she could start her prerequisites for nursing, and here we are at the beginning of year 2 for Molly. She's enrolled in psychology and she's really, really excited. Let's move forward several months. It is spring quarter. Molly is enrolled in psychology for the 3rd time, and now she's taking Chem 100 for the first time because she failed the first of 3 Chem courses she needed for the prereq nursing sequence. You see where this is going, right? Well, I didn't, not till it was too late for Molly. Halfway through her second year, I knew I had to talk to Molly about a major change, but I was really nervous. Why was I nervous? I don't know. Maybe because I didn't want to crush her. I mean, her whole identity was wrapped up in being a nurse. Maybe I was afraid of causing tension between Molly and me. Or maybe I was afraid I would not be doing my job if I asked her to change her major. Whatever the case, the fact of the matter is that Molly eventually realized on her own that nursing was not going to work for her because she was simply not going to have the grades or the financial aid to finish the BS. Molly left the university, and I'm actually not sure if she ended up with her degree in anything. I completely failed her. I know that as advisors, we can't save every student that comes across our desk. I know they can't all graduate, but if I had known then what I know now about the foreclosed student, I could have tried to help Molly discover a new passion and a new identity. What I hope all of you get out of our presentation today are some tips and tools you can use with students like Molly that will help them discover new pathways without crushing their dreams. Now let's talk about the theory behind our madness.
Thanks, Anna. Foreclosure comes out of Dr. James Marsh's identity status theory, which he focused on adolescent development, but I believe this is very relatable to undergraduate students. Marsha believed that, from a developmental theory framework, foreclosures embody an immature identity status that consists of students whose failure to explore and premature commitment to a major or career put their academic success at risk. Marsha believed that there are a variety of life domains we must make decisions on regarding our identity, such as politics and gender. Occupation is one of the most salient roles for teenagers and young adults.
Right, Kyle. So foreclosure originated out of Erickson. Well, how did Marsha expand on his work?
Well, Marsha expanded on Erickson's work, and it was Marsha who established this theory. He distinguished 4 states: foreclosure, moratorium, diffusion, and identity achievement, based on the presence or absence of 2 factors: exploration and commitment. Exploration is a process of gathering information and learning about all of the different options within that identity domain. So full exploration of occupations means a keen understanding of the vast array of career choices, hence why this domain can be challenging for students. The other process is commitment, which means the person has identified and selected an ideal choice. When students first meet each other, usually the first couple of things they get to know are their name and major. Students usually introduce themselves first by name and second by their major, saying, "I am a psychology major." And those 2 words, "I am," show just how significant the intended major is for that student's identity. Now, when a specific domain becomes relevant to a person's life, that is when identity development begins in that domain. Based on the 2 processes of exploration and commitment, Marsha identified 4 identity statuses determined by the individual's level of exploration and commitment. Let's take a look at those. Anna, can you explain identity diffusion?
Of course, Kyle. Identity diffusion is in the bottom right-hand corner of this matrix, and this means that a student has neither explored nor committed to a major career. Usually, this means that the student hasn't thought about it, or doesn't think this domain is important, or is just not motivated to think about it yet. Kyle, what is identity moratorium?
Identity moratorium is probably the most depressing sounding of the statuses, but as we work with students, this is an acceptable place for students to be at, and is actually not all that bad. Moratorium means that the student has done a great deal of exploration, but is not ready to commit to a major or career choice. This usually arises out of the student having difficulty with selecting between 2 or more very appealing options, or they're not quite confident enough to commit to that choice. Ultimately, this is a good place to be, according to Marsha, because they will eventually commit and reach identity achievement, which is of course the most ideal place for students to be with an identity domain. So that leaves us with the last status and today's focus, foreclosure. Anna, can you explain foreclosure?
Of course. Foreclosure means that the student has not taken the time to explore options, but has made a choice nonetheless. They're usually very steadfast on this decision as well, and not willing to explore alternative choices. To the surprise of many advisors, foreclosure students have been the topic of extensive research as far back as 40 years or more, and yet many advisors are not familiar with the characteristics of this population.
Thanks, Anna. It seems a little odd that people just decide to pick an option within an identity domain without exploring choices, and especially when it is a domain as important as a career pathway. So why do we see foreclosed students? Society recognizes that young people need time to find their way into the world, a period of exploration and experimentation in all domains in order to commit to something meaningful. Not having a sense of direction is unacceptable and a source of anxiety, therefore committing to something prematurely is rewarding. Students can face a lot of pressure not just from their family but society at large. There's a constant push for making lots of money, and that is more important than finding what you're truly passionate about.
Exactly. In addition, of course, we have to take into account the possibility of family history. A student may feel the real pressure to engage and become something, a particular career, because their mother or their father or their brothers or relatives might be. Meaning, I'm going to be a doctor because my mom's a doctor, my dad's a doctor, my brothers and sisters are doctors, my uncles are doctors. You see, they think that they need to logically fit in that pattern. In addition, of course, society and the media has been really exceptional about highlighting certain careers over others. So for example, my generation's ER, this generation's Grey's Anatomy, predominantly the careers that are described or highlighted are doctors and nurses.
Yeah, I agree with you, Olga. I think the reason is because we do see it on television and the billboards and everywhere. I mean, how many students actually know what anthropology is before they get to college beyond the name of it? This results in students making decisions out of a very limited awareness of what is truly available to them, and the first one that sounds good to them is usually the one they pursue.
Now, not all students who want to be doctors are foreclosed on that choice and actually are aware of all the facets of that career. So how do we figure out which ones are foreclosed in our few opportunities we have with the students we work with? Jose will introduce to us an assessment tool his institution utilizes. Jose? Oops, Jose, you are muted right now.
Sorry. Thanks, Kyle. At Old Dominion University, every freshman that comes to orientation is required to complete a transition to college inventory. We call it TCI. This online assessment measures non-cognitive factors that help to predict academic performance and retention. Included in the TCI are questions that are designed to measure career identity status, placing the students in one or four categories of the Marcia scales. For those participating in the webinar, we provided a handout for the Marcia scale. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you, Jose. Now, not all advisors have the opportunity to assess students before they meet with them. So I'm going to focus on how to identify a foreclosed student when they come to an advisor for an appointment. Let's assume that you've never met the student before and have 5 to 10 minutes to gauge whether or not this student has actually taken the time to explore their major and career options. How do you know? The first thing advisors need to be aware of is the fact that foreclosed students exist in every degree program and every career pathway. We more easily identify them in competitive programs such as the health field because we need to have conversations earlier and more urgently when students are not making the grades they need to for a program. However, a 4.0 student in nursing can still be foreclosed, just as much as a student in anthropology passing each course with a 2.5 or 3.0 can be as well. So we identify the students through personality traits they exhibit and key words or phrases they say. The big 5 personality traits are a great way to illustrate the extreme side of foreclosure, just so we all have an idea of things we can be mindful of in an advising appointment. According to this model, people fall on a spectrum from low to high on these 5 variables. I am going to go over these briefly and highlight the factors that most apply to our discussion. The first variable is extroversion. And high scores on extroversion mean that the individuals tend to gain energy from being around other people, while lower scores, that means individuals expend energy when around others. High scores on agreeableness usually mean that the person is cooperative, while low scores means a competitive and sometimes manipulative nature. High scores on conscientiousness indicate detail and goal-oriented behaviors and that the individual is a little bit more organized than those that score low on the scale. And emotional stability was formerly known as neuroticism, and I wonder why that changed. Higher scores generally indicate stable mood and emotional resilience, whereas lower scores indicate mood swings, anxiety, and irritability. And the last variable is openness, and high scores on this means that the person is creative and has a broader range of interests. This also usually refers to how open one is to new experiences. So clearly, this one has nothing to do with foreclosure, right? Overall, foreclosed students tend to display low openness to experience, high on conscientiousness, and low emotional stability. For me, the most surprising factor is emotional stability, but I realize that it really depends on the situation when you can see the foreclosed student displaying low emotional stability. While they are pursuing their original major, they tend to carry with them this "I'm fine" attitude, or what I call the freshman invincibility mentality if they are in their first year. As advisors, we can't change someone's personality, but maybe we can at least work with a foreclosed student to shake things up from their normal routine and work with them to be more open to new ideas and not so rigidly stuck in their goal. The next aspect that advisors can be aware of is overall student behaviors when they are foreclosed. This is not a comprehensive list, but definitely ones that come up more frequently. Foreclosed students, especially when they are not successful in that pathway, can be extremely defensive. They use that "I'm fine" or "I'm not worried" attitude to try and get off the subject. And the main reason for this is because internally, they are fully aware they are not succeeding. They are just not ready to admit it to anyone or vocally to themselves yet because they don't want it to become real. They want to continue on like they can fix it, which some certainly can. And they don't want to disappoint anyone, particularly their families. Research indicates that foreclosed students oftentimes have a very strong, positive relationship with their parents that they don't want to fracture when they have to change paths. It usually comes from a place of submissiveness rather than following their footsteps, but it certainly can be due to the latter. And they certainly don't want to fracture their seemingly well put together identity. So the idea of having to reconsider is not an option. This is why advisors will tend to see a very closed-minded student when they bring up the idea of a new path. And to make things even more complicated, once the student is even ready to consider alternative pathways, they are so used to following what other people think they would be good at that they will jump to the close enough pathway that society or trends dictate they should do. Anyway, we'll get to how to navigate a conversation with these students later. For now, the last thing I want to talk about is what kinds of questions advisors can ask to help confirm the suspicion of foreclosure, or identify a foreclosed student when they may not be exhibiting the usual personality traits and behaviors. Jose found this quote, and I think it pretty much sums up everything about probing questions and their purpose perfectly. Because the signature of identity foreclosure is commitment without crisis, advisors should be prepared to examine the depth of students' commitment by probing for students' conscious memories of crisis and of deliberate exploration of possible alternatives. So, here's a list of probing questions we came up with, and Jose and I are going to demonstrate, where I play the ridiculously foreclosed student, and Jose will play the advisor asking these probing questions. Let's pretend that we already did the intros, the formalities, and the get-to-know-yous. So this conversation will pick up right after the student stated what they want to major in. Take it away, Jose.
Okay. Kyle, can you imagine any circumstance where you would change your mind if another better career came along?
No, I've pretty much known forever that I wanted to be a doctor, and I still want to go down that road.
Okay. How did you decide that you want to be a doctor?
Well, my parents always thought I would make a great doctor, so one day I looked into it more and realized how much money it made, and I decided to be perfect for me.
Okay. What other career have you considered?
Not really much. I did look into being a nurse at one point, but it didn't seem very interesting or something I would enjoy doing.
I see. How did you discover what being a doctor is like?
Have you ever seen Grey's Anatomy? It's my favorite show. And all the things they get to do and the cases and patients they work with seem so cool. It looks awesome.
Okay. So how do you know that you will like being a doctor?
Well, I can just totally see myself having a great time saving lives by doing these emergency surgeries you see in the show. And I think I'd be great at handling the stress doctors go through when they have those critical patients. And end scene. So you get the idea. With questions like this, the advisor can clearly identify a foreclosed student through their statements, and from there help the student see the benefits of adequate exploration of majors before commitment to an ideal choice. Now we will focus on two approaches we can use with foreclosed students. Anna will discuss motivational interviewing techniques for first and second year students. Anna?
Thank you, Kyle. So thus far we've discussed what foreclosure is and how to recognize which students are foreclosed. Now let's discuss some very practical tools for working with the foreclosed student. I'm going to focus on the use of motivational interviewing. Also, I will refer to it as MI from here on out, which can be very beneficial to the first and second year student in particular. Let's look at the definition of MI. MI is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. MI has three distinct characteristics. It must be goal-oriented, it must be focused on the language of change, and MI must take place in an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. Historically, MI was developed to elicit behavioral change in high-risk populations like alcoholics, sex addicts, the beast, etc. In the case of the foreclosed student, their single-minded dedication to their chosen major can be considered high-risk academically because they will actually risk total academic failure in lieu of changing majors. This can cause all sorts of issues such as academic probation, eventual dismissal, financial aid suspension, and ultimately no degree. There are 5 guiding principles to keep in mind when engaging in MI. Advisors must practice discrepancy in order for successful implementation of MI to occur. This particular principle is really important the first time a student realizes they have a problem within their academic life that may keep them from succeeding in their intended majors. Students can become very emotional during this time as they are beginning to think of themselves outside the identity of their dream jobs. Because of this, students can become very resistant to change. In this state of mind, advisors must not tell students what they should do, even if we know that their current academic path is one of destruction. Instead, we can serve our students best by asking questions that help them to explore the consequences of not changing. As advisors, we must be able to express empathy. We must be able to see our students' issues and concerns through their eyes. When we, as the advisor, can do this, we let our students know that we understand them, and our students will trust us and open up. And as a result, they will allow us to guide their major exploration. As the advisor, it is important for us to recognize that even after a student sees the need to change, the student will experience ambivalence. In fact, this ambivalence can cause conflicting emotions within the student, and that student may become argumentative and fall back into the familiar routine of their original major, no matter how academically destructive that choice is. When this happens, advisors can best serve their students by normalizing ambivalence and use language that helps them to focus. Advisors must be comfortable rolling with resistance. Students will be resistant to change because it's hard, or it's scary, or it's not what mom and dad wants, or many other reasons that cause conflict within the life of our students. A student may argue, deny, or ignore any options of support the advisor is giving. When this happens, refer the student to earlier conversations that you have regarding the reflections on changing. A student may not be ready to go back to that earlier, more vulnerable self. That is okay. You can always ask them to think about the consequences of not changing and the benefits of doing so. Invite them to journal about it and have them come back later. Another tool is reflective listening. Often by employing reflective listening that rephrases statements that are contrary to change, this can cause the student to be more reflective and bring them closer to engaging in that change behavior. The last guiding principle of MI is the need to support self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is an individual's belief that they can change and achieve their new goal. The advisor helps the student achieve this by providing support, resources, and/or tools as needed. A student must be confident in order to employ self-efficacy. When an advisor is empathetic, trustworthy, focused, reflective, and non-judgmental, a student can gain the confidence that they need to be successful. Students may take full responsibility of their change at this point. So why does this work? The guiding principles of MI are meant to gently lead a conversation in the direction of change. It is likely that the advisor knows way before the foreclosed student knows that they will need a change in their academic career. Because of this, the guiding principles may not all take place in a single advising session. You know, it may take several intensive sessions just to employ empathy skills. It would not be uncommon for the advisor to take the first step and ask the first question relating to change. This can be really scary, especially for new advisors who, like me, thought that encouraging students to change their majors was just not what good advisors did. Remember, when I started advising, I really believed I needed to support the student no matter what, even if that meant enabling them their own academic destruction. This is where we get OARS. OARS is a tool that can be used to help start the necessary change conversations, a tool that helps lessen the scary. OARS is an acronym that stands for Open-Ended Questions, Affirm, Reflection, and Summarize. Open-ended questions and affirm require the advisor to speak and to engage the student in more conversation. For successful change conversations to take place, open-ended questions need to ask for elaboration or for an example. When an advisor affirms their student in change conversations, they are simply commenting positively upon that change. Reflection and summary require the advisor to listen. In fact, reflective listening is a cornerstone tool for motivational interviewing. We can cause our students to reflect on both not changing and changing, reflecting back what the student is feeling, and are repeating, rephrasing the language they are using. Advisors can really help support conversations by summarizing all or just snippets of change conversations. In fact, you might use summary to help with any part of OARS. When we can summarize positive change back to our students, they become more comfortable and confident with the idea of that change. Summary allows us to strengthen our relationship with the student because they become aware of how deeply committed we are to helping them. This will encourage the student to come to you quicker should they experience any change of direction in their new plan. And they probably will. I mean, think about your own experience in college. I know I changed my major at least 3 times. Now, Olga will assist me in a quick demonstration of OARS. Olga will play the student and I will play the advisor. Let's start with open-ended questions.
I would be so much more stressed if I could feel smart in just one of my classes.
Well, tell me about a time when you did feel smart. In what ways do you think you'll feel less stressed? And then there's affirmation.
I enrolled into that Intro to Public Health course.
Great job. I can tell you're serious about this change. Then there's reflection. What kind of problems has constant stress caused you?
I can't eat, I really sleep well, and I am so sick all of the time. But it's only 2 more years, right?
Ooh, that sounds really hard. What do you think about that kind of struggle?
It's not easy, and it's not feeling that healthy for me either.
Thank you, Olga. And then for summary is so unique, it's hard to give an accurate example here, but really in summary, as long as the advisor is repeating key points, ideas, and courses of action back to the student, summary can be one of the easier steps to complete, though just as important as the rest. So motivational interviewing is a tool for change. Lasting change occurs within the process of 5 distinct areas. We have pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. Some models actually include a 6th stage called relapse. However, if I think that this occurs with a student, you'll just be you'll be starting the whole process over again, but maybe not as in depth. So let's look at pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplation is when an individual has no recognition or need or interest in change. And then you have contemplation. This would be the recognition for change, but maybe they're not ready to act on that change quite yet. Then you have preparation, and that's the planning for change. Action is the implementation of that planned change and the adoption of new habits. Lastly, maintenance is the ongoing practice of the new habit. This 5-change process should be looked upon more like a wheel with omnidirectional arrows leading the so-called charge of change. Change under this transtheoretical model can only take place once successful implementation of MI has actually occurred. The double-headed arrows indicate that an individual can flow between one process and the next and flow back again. In fact, during a change or major exploration in the case of our students, an individual may get to the action stage and jump back to contemplation, and it may look like this, or even like this, by the time the change process has completed and the student is fully dedicated and graduated with a degree in their new intended major. Let's take a look at what this process might look like for our students. In pre-contemplation, a student might say, if only my organic chem instructor would tell me what to study. And then in contemplation, a student might say, I probably shouldn't retake psychology for the 3rd time. Preparation, a student might say, I need to consider another major so that I can be successful. And in action, a student might say something like this. Hi, I love my public health course. It's time to talk to the Career Center about a job possibilities. And in maintenance, a student might look something like this. I am a public health major, and as soon as I finish my internship in Puerto Rico, I will be graduating. See how articulate the student has become by the maintenance stage? Truly, MI is the best, and it's such a practical and empowering tool, and it is really beneficial in helping the foreclosed student engage in positive change behavior.
Thank you, Anna. Olga will now introduce a model for advising foreclosed students later on in their undergraduate career. Olga?
Thank you so much. Wow, we've really learned a lot already. I mean, the foreclosed student, MI, OARS, it's a lot to take in. So I'd like to operationalize things a little bit more right now, bring it down to another level, more boots on the ground kind of approach, dealing with a particular population. In particular, I'm talking about the foreclosed student who's been denied admission to his or her preferred program. A model and approaches that will help support us in our role as advisors and help our students support them through transition. So we've all had it happen, right? That student lands in our office who's just received that email or snail mail that tells them that everything they've hoped for, everything they wanted to do, the choice that they jumped to has come to a screeching halt. They're going to feel very blindsided at this moment, frustrated, betrayed, a range of distressful emotions. Remember, there's stress and there's distress, and in this case, they're really in a state of distress. They're angry, concerned about their future. They might even be thinking that they're feeling quite a bit embarrassed. As advisors, we're not feeling that great about this moment either. The advisory experience, we're really on the front line of this situation. To the student, we really are a representative of that institution, and we are the human embodiment of that rejection. So that means we're really going to feel that full brunt of that student's reaction. Okay, so remember now that we're talking about a student, a foreclosed student who's been denied. At this state, they might be feeling like they're leaning towards leaving the campus. Tinto gave us three contributing factors that really affected attrition. One, a student's really just not academically making the grade. They're just not achieving. Secondly, that a student cannot engage intellectually or socially with their campus community. Third, that a student is not going to be able to meet their academic or their career objective. Again, foreclosed student just received a denial. Two of those three factors have just been met and the stage has been set for attrition. Now, we as advisors know, of course, long term, that's a real loss to the student. But let's stop for a moment and talk also on a practical level about how that affects the institution. The Educational Policy Institute of 2013 calculated that 4-year public institutions lost about $12 million of revenue due to student attrition, and that 4-year private institutions lost about $8 million. On a very practical level, attrition, of course, affects our institutions. So, how can we then assist our students to move from this very chaotic state and this very distressful state into something a little bit more creative? So I'd like to introduce at this point the possibility of a courageous conversation. Now, courageous conversations, it's a really big deal, right? It's high stakes. There's a difference of opinion, certainly between the student and between the institution. And as advisors, as we said, we're right at that front line of when this is happening. Because we are at that front line, we really are the best person and the best place for this to take place. It's high stakes. It's going to be very emotional initially. So it's up to us then to start to establish a very respectful environment in which we can have a conversation to establish mutual purpose. We're going to do that by stepping out occasionally and stepping back into the conversation through contrasting statements. Things like, I'm not saying that this isn't important to you. What I am saying is that I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that you find an alternative that's exciting and helps you achieve everything that you value and that you want in your life. So, we're going to meet our students where they are, but we are not going to leave them in that place. How do we transition then? And how do we support that student to continue to transition forward? And at this stage, I'd like to introduce the idea of the REACH model. Through the REACH model, our students are going to rework and revisit the choices that they've made and really start to move into developing a new approach or a new objective, something that's designed by them instead of something that's been handed to them, like in the case of a denial. The first step is really the step of recognition and reflection. So I'd like to take this out of context for just a moment to kind of give an example. Anybody who's ever traveled with me in NACADA, Kyle or Jose, my friend Tina, Anna hasn't done this yet, but she might. You don't want to follow me anywhere because whenever I go to some place new, in all honesty, I am very geographically challenged. I don't know if anybody else out there can relate. It's really hard for me to adjust to how I got to where I am and where I am at that moment, how to get anywhere else. And if you were to throw something at me at that moment, just say a map or even an app, I got to tell you, it's not going to be very effective. Why? I really do not have a point of reference yet in this scenario. Okay, for the foreclosed student who's just been denied, definitely the same situation. They do not have a point of reference from which to move forward. So one of the ways that we can start helping that student is we start listening to that story. That story of how they got to that point of where they are right now, it serves as kind of a map. And it also is a great analogy, of course, for us thinking about how we're going to transition that student, continue them moving forward, going to the map. The second part is reflection. This is a little tougher because this is where we're going to start to introduce the idea to the student that there are some need to knows, some things that they thought that they might need just a little bit of tweaking. So think of it as kind of like if you're in a fun house and you're looking in a mirror, one of those funhouse mirrors, the view's distorted. Or if you're wearing glasses or prescription contact lenses and they're not quite right, it's kind of blurry. For the student, it's the exact same thing. The view is distorted. And so we're going to provide some need to knows. One of the ways that we can do that is to flip the transcript, and Kyle's going to help describe that.
Thanks, Olga. Flipping the transcript is a technique that I have stolen from one of my colleagues, Ruth Ryan, at Washington State University, as she was my office neighbor, and I would maybe occasionally eavesdrop on a conversation or two, and I loved what she did with this. If she ever had a student who refused to see that their grades were not getting to where they needed to be for a specific pathway, she would take out their transcript and put it in front of them. As she did that, she would say, let's say that you are my advisor, and I was your student coming in with this transcript, and said I want to pursue a major in electrical engineering. What would you say back to me as an advisor? The student usually would then say something along the lines of, well, your grades are too low to get into this program, and you would need to retake several courses, including math. She then would respond with, okay, what would you suggest I do then? To which the student could respond with, well, I see you have A's in your cultural studies courses, so since you're good at it and seem to like it, why don't you pursue that? And in that moment, she would say, what did you just say to me? Now, the student could respond with, what? I don't get it. Or they could respond with, okay, I see what you're saying to me now. So keep in mind that this does not work for everyone, but sometimes having the student become their own observer can get them to unglue themselves from their foreclosed decision.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Outstanding. You can use that same technique with other things. You could flip a resume, for example, if you're trying to point out things like maybe missing clinical hours or perhaps extracurricular activities that are missing and might make that student a more competitive candidate. Moving along that path, the next step would be to really start to eliminate false constructs. Listening to that story, we're really starting to highlight on the beliefs and the motivations, the inaccurate perceptions that got them to where they are at this given moment. This might be a good time where we can start to introduce some basic facts, ONET, occupational handbook, little things that we can possibly interject at this point. Why? Because in the absence of facts, myths are created. Students are creating myths about the institution, about the program, perhaps even myths about themselves. And those myths about themselves might be very destructive. Things like, well, maybe I'm not that smart or I'm never going to make it. So let's help clear up that debris a little bit so we can provide a better perspective for that student by eliminating those false constructs. The next step that we're going to be incorporating is their ability to adapt. This is a really powerful way to help a student identify that they have already proven themselves to be very successful in the face of challenges. Help them identify those previous successes that are important now at this time. In addition, let's help them identify their network. It might be the support network. It might be people in their family, but in all honesty, it might not be. It could be people, friendships, other faculty, people that they have met. Let's help them identify who's on their team because they might need to rely on them at this time. In addition, given that a denial has just occurred, and this could be feeling like a very life-changing moment, let's help them identify courageous conversations to come, and not only identify them, but let's help them by practicing. Kyle's going to help me do that.
Thank you, Olga. So one tool I use with my students who are very anxious about breaking the news to their family about their change of major or career is role-playing with them. It allows them to first experience how they think the conversation will go, which is usually a very dramatic and negative perspective. Then I show them how most conversations go and allow them to experience a more positive scenario. Olga and I are going to use our acting skills to demonstrate this. First, the bad conversation, where I play the student so the advisee, in this case Olga, can demonstrate to me how they think their parents will act. Hey, Mom.
Hi, sweetheart. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to see you. You have not been around enough. You never call.
Yeah, it's good to see you. How are you? How's Dad doing?
Oh, we are just great. You know, your daddy's fit as a fiddle. I'm fine. We're doing wonderful. We are so proud of you. So good to see you.
Yeah, great. So I need to talk to you about school a little bit.
Oh my goodness, we are so excited about your school. You are the first in our family to become a doctor. I am so excited. I've told all my friends.
Yeah, about that. So we are not really going to go down that path anymore. My advisor and I have been talking, and
wait. I beg your pardon?
Yeah, we decided that my grades are a little too low for medical school, and being this late in the game, I decided that I should change my major and look at finishing a degree in just like the general health sciences, and then that way I can look into healthcare administration in the future.
Are you kidding me? Let me tell you something. You are our hope for our future. Oye, mijo, if your abuelita were alive, you would kill her again.
And end scene. So before we get a little bit too graphic in how dramatic that goes. And now I'll play the parent and demonstrate to the student how a much more realistic and positive scenario goes.
Hey, Dad, how you doing?
Hon, what are you doing here?
Well, it'd been a while since I'd come home, and I thought I'd come and visit with you guys for a while.
Sure, how's school going? Is my little girl still in business, getting ready to make lots of money and buy me that fancy retirement house with the boat I've been dreaming about?
Yeah, well, it's funny you should mention that, because it's kind of what I wanted to talk to you guys about. Dad, it's not going that great.
Oh.
I'm having to repeat courses. I'm not really loving the subject. This isn't for me, Dad.
Okay, well, you're all right, though. Like, you're not getting kicked out of school or anything, right?
No, and it's a really good thing, Dad, that we talk about this now. I've been working with my advisor. I've got some really good career options and degree options to pursue those careers. He said things that I think are really going to fit, Dad. It's going to help me, be self-sustaining, and I'm really excited about it. I'd like to talk to you and Mom about that.
Okay, cool. Well, let me go get her, and then we can sit down and talk about this together. How does that sound?
That sounds really good.
Cool. Well, as long as I can settle for a jet ski, will that work for you?
I could do that. I think I could do that.
Good. All right. I'll be right back.
Great. Thank you so much, Kyle. He's a wonderful actor. He'll be here through the week, guys. Okay. Wonderful. So all things moving along relatively well. We're really kind of at a stage right now of modified motivations, right? There are some existing reasons that students have gone along this path that are okay. We're willing to keep. There are some new incentives that we've hopefully found as well. Through these, we're really opening the door, new opportunities, some additional options. Now is the point where we need to start identifying the amount of breadth and depth that student needs to do in their career exploration and their academic exploration. This means homework. We're now moving into the stage where what I call holistic help. We're going to meet that student now with a plan of next steps. There might be resources that we can provide that student right here in our office. That's great. There might be something online. It might be some kind of handout, anything that student can hang on to and move forward with themselves. In addition to that, we're going to connect them to university resources at this time. It might be the Career Center. It might be a health center. It might be a different advising office. Here's the thing. Back when we were at that courageous conversation stage, we couldn't introduce new topics here at this point or new resources. Those would just be seen as one more problem, one more hurdle, one more place that they have to go. Refer too early, we increase their level of frustration. But at this point, anything that we introduce now can be seen as a benefit instead of a problem. And then the last step here is we're going to set a follow-up. The follow-up's important because now we're going to regroup and gather all that information, that new information that student has discovered since our last challenging meeting, the initial meeting that we had. And we're going to follow up with things that might seem like a more normal advising session, more typical. Maybe there's prerequisite courses we need to talk about. Maybe there's an academic plan that we need to design. Maybe there are deadlines or applications that we need to discuss. But now it's going to feel very much less high stakes. Does that even make sense? Less high stakes than it was initially when they first walked in. Advising really is important. What we do for our institutions and what we do for our students really is pretty critical. At its best, it's a synergistic experience. It's an art and a science. When we work with the strengths and the expertise of our colleagues all across the nation and maybe now with NACADA the world, when we discover things like foreclosure and motivational interviewing and OARS and courageous conversations and the REACH model, we're incorporating things in a synergistic way to serve our students best, right? For our institutions, we are helping retain qualified students. For our students, we are helping them re-engage intellectually and socially with their campus community. We are helping them identify and achieve an academic and a career path that is achievable for them. We're setting the stage for student retention. Thank you so much for sharing this journey with me on Courageous Conversations and the REACH model. I hope you found something that was helpful.
Thank you, Olga. So this concludes the presentation portion of our webinar on foreclosed students. We hope our insights are helpful to you, and we now have a little less than 15 minutes to answer any questions participants have, and you should have instructions on how to submit those questions. I do have one already, and have there been situations where the options are better elsewhere? And I'm going to ask my colleague Olga to take that one on.
Yeah, I think probably all of us have experienced that point where we've probably thought about for a student that something might work better in a different location. And certainly, of course, for me, and I think for any advisor, our number one concern is always what's most beneficial for that student. In addition, though, in terms of talking about foreclosed students, it might be not just different location, but we're talking about different program. And we have to realize when we incorporate these techniques and so forth, these things take time. It's about building relationship with students, most definitely. And it might take us more than 1 time, 2 times, 3 times to help that student move forward, whether it's to a different institution or whether it's a different program within our institution. So if I can provide an example of that real quick, I was working with a student who was very focused on nursing. This was early on in my career, kind of like a Molly situation. And it took me a while working through her story. It actually took 3 semesters to identify why it was so difficult for her to move on. And it was a very serious situation. She had watched her mother die, and the thought of moving into a different profession was not something that she could handle. But in all honesty, when we got to that point and we could break through, she did apply to a different program, was admitted, and was very happy. So yes, absolutely. This is where our skill set as advisors becomes so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. I see a question here that asks, any tips for working with parents of foreclosed students? And I'm happy to take that one on. Most of the time, students have this fear that parents are not going to respond to this too well. So let's look at it when parents aren't responding to that situation too well. Usually you want to come, it always comes back to the student. So how do they feel about their student maybe not graduating, not getting into another program, not being willing to change major? And they usually come around to, well, of course I'd love to see my kid have a bachelor's degree. So if you can at least get them to that point, they'll get more open-minded about it. But that's why I really like having those role-playing conversations. Ultimately, it's really that student's fear that may not really actually be legitimate. That the parent would actually be very supportive of them. So we have those role-playing conversations to really make sure that they feel good and confident in themselves about going to that parent. Now, if everything crashes and burns, and I've certainly had that happen before, then I would bring in the parent into the conversation with the student's permission, of course, and really come back to, let's focus on the student completing that bachelor's degree. And you want that to happen more than them just failing out.
Can I add something to that, Kyle?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that helps parents too, I have found that if you can talk to the parent about jobs with their students. I think a lot of parents have a really real fear that their student can't get a job in cultural studies or whatever route they decide to go, and we as advisor know that's not true. That a 4-year education really is focusing on all the other things that make you marketable, communication and critical thinking. And so I think addressing the issue of being able to get a job after graduation is also very helpful in talking to parents.
Thank you, Anna. I see another couple of questions around the same theme of what happens when you only have 1 meeting or 5 to 10 minutes or a very brief amount of time. Yes, we did definitely talk about these and it being very longer quality conversations. But we also did provide you some probing questions you can ask. In my opinion, when it comes to having quick meetings, and I definitely have had caseloads of 300 to 400 before, sometimes the student can unforeclose themselves, I suppose, through just a little bit of a shakeup of their world. So a couple probing questions, maybe using a few facts and resources, ONET, to kind of show them, hey, this may not necessarily be the best fit for you. Some of them need a full earthquake to shatter their whole lives, and I totally understand that as well, and that's where you'll have more conversations. But sometimes it just takes that little, let's plant the seed, and maybe they'll come back to us for another conversation about that. And if that's all you can do in that 5 to 10 minutes, you at least have tried to shake things up a little bit. And sometimes it'll shake them up enough to be able and be willing to move. Other times they'll need a few more efforts, and then maybe you can be a little bit more proactive in communication with them. But I totally hear you on what happens when you have only a few minutes. Some really good questions you can ask and just kind of leave it there. Sometimes you might have to reprioritize your appointment and say, we'll get to the course scheduling later, because if you unglue them enough, but then they just come right back to that path once you get to the course scheduling piece, did that really make a difference for that student? Anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah, I would like to add that interest inventories will be also a good tool to work with those students.
Awesome, thank you. Going through the questions here, there's a question that asks, are there any dangers of misidentifying a student as foreclosed? That's a great question. Obviously, we can see students, and there was another question that asked if foreclosed means that they're at risk, and that isn't always the case. You might have a student who is foreclosed on business, and they have a 4.0, they're doing great with it, and ultimately you may not be able to see that. They might have a few statements they say that you're like, oh, you might not actually have really adequately explored this major. There are definitely some times where I'm like, oh God, you think it's just, you went into becoming a doctor because you like Grey's Anatomy, and then I just kind of want to hit myself against something at that point. Sure, but if you misidentify them, they can at least re-clarify with you as long as you're willing to hear that. And I wouldn't necessarily say that all foreclosed students are at risk, because some of them are doing just fine. They're glued in that major, and they're not willing to move, but they're 4-0ing it. And maybe they'll see a career change in their future once they get to that practical application. So if they were in a nursing major and then got to their clinical rotation in the program, they're like, oh God, I have to talk to patients. Well, maybe that wouldn't work for them, and then they would jump themselves out of that pathway. So sometimes they're not at risk, sometimes they can be, no matter how well they're doing in the program.
I also think one of the really great things about the tools we've talked about today is that they can actually be used with all types of students without like risk. But I think they're just particularly very good at working with the foreclosed student in particular. So motivational interviewing always works. Courageous conversation almost always works. And you're going to know if a student's not foreclosed because they're like, yeah, let's do it, like right off the bat. And you're going to be like, okay, not foreclosed. It's okay. So hope that helps.
And there are a couple comments in here about is foreclosed being a little negative in connotation, and yeah, I definitely hear that. I mean, Marcia's identity status theory with diffusion, moratorium, and foreclosure, I'm like, God, it sounds like these students are dying. But in reality, you're just using those terms for yourself. You're not going to have a student come into your office and then you tell them, you're foreclosed, let's unglue you. That's just kind of for you to have, and then these are just tools for you to be able to say, well, is this working for the student? Is this not working well? What can I do as an advisor? And you can certainly frame that positively as, hey, it sounds like you had to make a choice really quickly when you got started in college, but now let's maybe take some time. What does that look like for you? And can certainly make this a very exciting and engaging conversation for them. Going through the list here, let's see. Couple questions about specific populations. How would you advise international students who are limited to certain majors because of their sponsorship, or working with student athletes? Certainly great questions here. If a student athlete is not getting enough play time and they want to transfer to a different institution, how do you get them to stay? And that comes down to what's going to work best for that student. So if that student athlete can get another opportunity and have lots of playtime and still get into a great program that they're really happy with, that might be in their best interest. But other times they might be in the best program for themselves right now, and you can come back to that idea. A couple of my colleagues who work with student athletes always like to have that conversation of, well, let's talk about after you're done playing ball. Let's talk about after you're done playing sports, or maybe you don't make it to the professionals. What are you going to do with your career at that point? And being able to kind of skip ahead and see that the playtime isn't always going to be the most important factor to them in the world might help them stay and stick around. Any of my colleagues have more experience working with international students that they'd like to tackle that question for? Or student athletes?
Well, I don't have that much experience with athletes, but I do know that NCAA rules have a big impact in what they are able to do or not in terms of the program that they play with.
When it comes to athletes that come, my way, I try to be very clear about the they come in thinking, well, I want to be a nurse. Well, there's some real realities to being a nurse in our programs in terms of clinical hours and things like that that are definitely going to compete with the amount of practice and their travel time and everything else. So I'd like to piggyback on what you said, Kyle. even if they're thinking that that's all they're going to be, I really try to take the time to spend some time exploring other options within the health field that they can do. And like you said, exploring options after graduation as well. So it's really important that we take whatever opportunity we can and take a teachable moment, in a sense, to just say, hey, have you ever considered, can I show you this? You know, and if nothing else, to give them that opportunity to take a second thought. The other thing is definitely working with their either international advisor or their athletic advisor. I mean, we don't work in isolation, right? We need to be incorporating working with our colleagues who are serving students across the campus. I think that's really important, so we're all on the same page for every student. And then some very practical things, right? They're advising notes and things like that, so we can all see what's going on in any given student's case. That helps.
Thank you, Olga. So next question we're going to tackle is, what if we engage a student in MI and that student is just unwilling to change or refuses to pick another major? So Anna, could you tackle that one for us, please?
Yeah, of course, Kyle. So I've experienced this several times with some of my students. And sometimes it just takes more time to get that student to come around, more resources, maybe another quarter or semester or two of floundering. But also you have to look at your student and their personality and your personality, and maybe even suggest a different advisor, because maybe what you're saying to them is not getting through. Maybe you're too close. Maybe you can't get close enough. Maybe one of the resources you referred to the student fell through and now they don't trust you, or for whatever reason. There could be lots of reasons why suddenly you're not that trusted, why you're not working for that student, I should say. So you really have to gauge the student where they're at. I had another student who was just, and I could be really candid with him. I just said, dude, you're going to fail. And I was able to be very blunt with him, and he responded to that. But not every student's going to be that way. And so it's difficult. You will run into students who just won't change. And those are those students that we can't save or may not be able to save. And we need to refer them out or do something different. And that sucks, but that's what happens.
Sometimes it takes a village, right? And I like this next question that was asked. If the advisor does not want to come off as the dream crusher, what do you rely on to help the student face the reality of their situation? And is there anything else other than just the time they get denied admission that you can have that conversation? And so today we share with you about how you can have these conversations with first and second year students, third and fourth year students. But certainly sometimes when we're trying to have those conversations like, hey, have you thought about other things? The student can respond with, why are you trying to tell me I can't do this, right? And sometimes that is not a good place for us to be. You know, we want that positive relationship built with that student. That's why I kind of like to blame other resources for it and show facts that just don't lie. ONET, very valuable resource for me, especially about that career advising piece. Let's look at the reality of these things. Doctors make a lot of money. Okay, let's take a look at some starting salaries for them, or the fact that they get into residency and are swimming in student debt once they finish medical school. Let's talk about satisfactory academic progress and kind of put it on financial aid. Can you still realistically repeat all of these classes? Can you spend another few more years doing this pathway? Or do we need to proactively say, you know what, if it's going to take you 5 years to complete and you don't have that kind of time, what are we going to do now? Anyone else want to jump in on this? Okay, good enough is what my colleagues are saying to me right now. And our last couple of questions I'm seeing get asked here are just about resources. We have a very thorough resource packet with a bunch of references and websites for you all to take a look at. The TCI is also attached to that Jose provided. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Once again, we hope this is helpful to you, and please contact any of us if you want to continue the discussion. For now, there are some post-webinar activities we have suggested in the handout, and again, those resources are there. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. You're fantastic.
Thank you so much.